particular video or episode, we're going to create an example of a class falling on calculating the area of a triangle. Okay, all right, so quickly we want to say that calculating the area of a triangle in relation to classes and an object, it means that we want to create create a class called what? Called triangle. Two, we will need to find the variables or the fields. We need to find the fields, define the fields, and then three, we define the methods for the fields. All right, so what are the fields? What are the fields? The fields to a triangle. A triangle has what properties? What are the properties of a triangle? You tend to understand that the triangle has a length and then it has a width. So these are the two major fields of a triangle. What will be the behavior of the triangle? The behavior are seen as methods. Okay, so like I said earlier on, over here we'll need to create some assessors and then mutators. What are these assessors and what are these mutators? The assessors are simply what some other books will make reference to as the get methods. The get methods help that the fields are now assessed using what? These public methods. So they are actually public methods that return the private variables, because these fields, we are going to set them to be what? Private. And to access these private variables, we need to go through a public method. Okay, so the assessors and the mutators are public methods, whilst the assessors grants access to the private variables or fields. The mutators, they are also methods. Assessors and the mutators are both methods. They help us to assign values to the private variables or fields. So we will not need to be confused here. The fields, like I said earlier on, they are variables. They serve as, in this case, the identifiers or the properties to that class. Okay, so if you take, for example, the class triangle, then the triangle has a length and it has a width. Okay, so we will need to create assessors and then create mutators. Remember again, the assessors help us to get access to the private variable. If it is private, if the variable is private, doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to assign a value. We should be able to assign a value, but now we cannot assign a value to it directly. If it is private, it doesn't mean that we should not be able to get its content. We should be able to get its content, but not directly. So the assessors are to help us get access to the private variables content, but this time through what? Its corresponding public method. Likewise, to assign a value to a private variable, we will need to do that using its corresponding public method, and these are called the mutators. All right, so quickly what we're going to do is to clear out this, and then we write our code in here. So we're going to create a public class, we call this base. In this base class, that is where the main method would reside. Okay, so we give it a signature public static void main. If you don't understand these constructs, go back to the very first video that I shared on this programming language, and then look at it. You tend to understand the attributes, or you can just look at the episode on methods, part 1. You should understand all of these attributes to the method that you have specified here, so then you can quickly catch up. Okay, so we will leave this method and in class, and then we will create the class. We will not make this public. We just give it, create a class. We call it triangle. Okay, so this class triangle, like we said, theoretically it should have some sort of what fields that are private. So it will have a private field, private, and then the length and then the width, we set them both as integer types. So we give it the private int length, and then we create the other private int width. Okay, so these are the two fields. Let me save this. This should be base.java. I want to save this in my document. Let me look for the class, a folder called Java. Where are you? Where are you? All right, so let me save it in this folder instead. I call that sandwich of a class. All right, so I click on save. The name of our file that we'll be working on is base Java. All right, so that is in document. Click on save. Okay, so we can see our keywords in the colored forms. These ones are the fields here. Fields or variables. Oops. Okay, so now in this class we have created the fields. We have given them the attribute what? Private. Now look at this. If we want to, let's say, print the length and then the width. So let's assume that over here we give it the value 9, and then the width we give it the value, let's say 8. We want to print them out in the class base system.out.print. Okay, so in this case we'll say length is, now we'll put a plus here, we call it length. And then we want to do the same for width. So system.out.print width is, we put a plus here and we call this length. Okay, so quickly let's run this code and then see what the output is. Because I'm doing this in the test editor, I will have it run it from the console. Okay, so if you have the NetBeans, you can run it directly from the NetBeans environment. It should work fine. Just create a project and then create a class, call it base, and then you can create an additional class, call it base. Okay, in creating this second class, when you right click on the name of the project, when you right click on the name of the project, you should have the option to select new. From new, select Java class, and then you can create an additional class in there. Okay, so quickly let's continue. Let's move on from here. Okay, so I'm going to run this from the terminal. I would have to first reroute this to get the directory set right. So I put the file in documents. So I move on to document, and then from document it is in a folder called sandwich. I press on tab, so this gives me help on to get the name of the folder. It is in the folder sandwich Java class. Okay, and then the file. All right, let me just hit on enter. So now we are in that folder. So now what we want to do is to run the file called base.java. Okay, so we use the Java C against the compiler, Java C, and then write base, the name of the file, base.java. We press on enter. So it is going through the compilation process. Bam. All right, great. So exactly as it was expected. Now look at this. We have these errors. What did the error say? Base.java 5, that is on line number 5. What is happening in them? Error cannot find symbol. What symbol can it not find? It can't find what? Length. Do you understand? It cannot find length. Why can't it find length? It can't find length. Okay, so now let's look at the other. On line number 6 also cannot find symbol also. What is the problem there? It cannot find length. Okay, I think I have repeated this the same twice. This is supposed to be with, all right, but in any case you will still have the same error. So let me go back to recompile this code. Oops. You are expected to have the same error. Okay, great. So we still have the two errors, but we have corrected. We have corrected with, and then we still have the length here. All right. So the understanding is that it cannot find symbol. Why can it not find symbol on line number 5 and then 6? The reason why it cannot find them is that length as declared and defined. They are declared and defined on line number 12 and then 13 in the code line, and then they all belong to the class what? Triangle. Okay, so length and then width, they all belong, they are private variables, and then they belong to the class what? Triangle, which means that their scope of visibility is only between this bracket and this bracket. Outside of these two brackets, they cannot be seen. They are not visible outside of this bracket. Okay, so if a method will need to use these values, then they can only be used within of this class and not outside. Okay, they can be used within of the class triangle and not outside the class triangle. Now let's look at this. If we want to be able to make reference to these variables outside of the class, all we need to do is to create an instance of the class, create an object for the class. Okay, create an instance or object for the class. Not for the class, of the class. There you go there, my friend. Okay, great. So now how do you do that? In doing that, what is the name of the class for which we want to make reference to 8 members? Length and then width, they belong to the class what? Triangle. Okay, so we say in that we're going to create an object for the class triangle. Great. So the name of the class is triangle. What's the name of the object? We want to maybe call it TR. We use the new operator followed by the name of the class again, and then we have the open and the close parentheses here. Oops. So we terminate this line. When we do this, we have created an object for the class TR. Now the object, an object for the class triangle. The name of the object is called what? TR. The keyword or the operator new is to create memory location. For the object what's TR. So then anytime additional objects are created, they are given space on the memory. Okay, so moving on, why did we create this object tr? The object tr is to help us to have access to members of the class. What? Members of the class triangle. Okay, so what are the members the class triangle has for now? It has the members length and then width. Okay, so now to make reference to length, we would have to use the object tr dot what length. We'll do tr dot width. Let's save this. Used to have not bought this software. All right, so let's go back. Let's get back again quickly, and then let's compile again the code. Java C base.java. We press on enter. We still have this error. So okay, quickly let's look at this. Why do we have the error? Let's be sure we have saved this. Let's compile it again. Java C base. Okay, so error width has private access in triangle. Okay, great. They are still 7 as private variables here. So what we can do to outwit this is quickly let's do this. Let's quickly solve this problem. So what we're going to do now is to quickly create what we call the assessors. Now creating these assessors, what will these assessors do? The assessors are to help to make these private variables now accessible outside of the method. Okay, so what we're going to do now here is that we will create a public method. We call it what? Get length. Oops, yes, get length, and then we would say it should simply just return what? Return that private variable content. Okay, so now if you want to make reference to the variable length, is because it is private, we can't access the private variable outside of the class. All right, so what we do, we instead can call it in the public method for which it resides. Now we have put it in the public method. So let's change this to what? Get length. And this is a method, so we have the open and the close parentheses. Likewise, we would need to do the same for width. So we create a public method that will help us to access it outside of the class. So we create a public method, we call it public. Oops, this should be an int. It should return an integer type. Why? Because length is declared as an integer. So this method is supposed to return its corresponding type. Okay, so this should be a public int, get width. What should it do? It should return what? The private variable width. All right, so back again on the concept. length and then width are private. To access them, we need to create the assessors. Okay, so what are these assessors? Like I explained earlier on, they are to help make these private properties accessible. How do they make them accessible? We can realize over here that they are in a method, but the method has a success modifier as what public, which means that now the method getLength is visible. It's visible outside the class what? Outside of the class triangle. It is the private variables that cannot be accessed outside the class, but the public methods can be accessed outside. So we are putting the private variables inside of the public methods. So we are going to access these private variable through what? The public method. Okay. So in this case, it will mean that if you want to access the width, instead of calling the name of the variable, we call the name of the public method for which the variable resides. So we do tr dot what? Dot get width, because width resides now is visible through the method what? The method get width. Now let's save this and then let's run it again from the terminal. All right. So Java C base.java, let's press on enter. Great. So now it compiles without an error, which means that it is now visible to it. Let's run the code. So now write Java and then base. It prints that the length is 9 and then the width is what? Is 8. So this is typically what we call what? Encapsulation. Encapsulation. Why? Because the properties here are set to be private, and then we are unable to access them directly until we go through what their public methods. Okay, so now these are the assessors we have created. We need to create their corresponding mutators. Okay, so what are these mutators? The mutators are simply what will help us to assign values to the private variables. Okay, so quickly let's do that. They are also public methods, but this time they do not return values. So public set what? Set length. So we pass on an argument int, let's say we call this L, and we will say that it should assign its value, L, whatever value that is passed on from the user will be passed on to the variable L. So it should pass on a content into what? Width, which will mean that we are no more going to assign values here directly. We would want to allow the user to now pass on the values. Okay, so we have done for the length. We have to do same for the width. Public void set what? Set width. So we create a parameter, we call it int w to represent width. Okay, so what we're going to do, what we imply here is that we take the private variable that is width, and then we say that whatever value that the user would input should be passed on to the parameter w. So the w should pass on its content to the private variable width. Okay, so why did we create these mutators? We created these two mutators because we will need to be able to assign the value to the private variable. We have declared them as private. To be able to assign a value to them outside of the class, it is impractical. It is not possible unless we go through their public methods. Okay, so we have put width in the public method. Again, we are putting in a public method, which is what? Set width. So then we can now pass on a value to this variable. Okay, so now what we're going to do is here at the top, we're going to use the graphical user interface. So we import javax dot swing Assessors. Okay, so this will help us to use the G option pane. Okay, so we create a string variable, we call that input. Okay, if G option pane dot show input dialog, what do you want to say? Enter what? Enter length. Okay, so when the user enters length, we want to create an integer variable that will store it. So we want to call that, let's say, ll. All right, which will mean that now we must convert the string input. The string input into an integer. All right, so on line number 9, we using the graphical user interface G option pane to ask the user to input what? Input the length. We receive that. Because it's captured in a string, we need to convert the string into an integer, and then we store the integer value in LL. Okay. We would want to take the second input, which is the width. So write input is equal to G option pane dot show input dialog, enter width. All right. We will need to convert this into a corresponding integer time. So what we'll do is we create another variable integer, we call it, let's say, ww, and then we use the wrapper class integer.pass int. What do we want to convert is still stored in the string variable input. All right, so now we have our two integer inputs from the user, ll and then ww. Okay, what we want to do is to pass on this value ll to the private variable, assign that value to the private variable what? Length, and then assign ww to the private variable what? Width. How possible is this? This can only be made possible only if we go through what? The mutators. The mutators, what are they for? They are to help us assign values to what? The private variables. Okay, which will mean that in this case ll over here we will need to pass on its content to what? To L, and ww will pass on the content to w here. Okay, which means that we will need to call the set methods. So we call the set method for length and the set method for what? For width. Okay, over here. So now to do that, we use the name of the object tr dot what? Set what? Set length, and then we pass on the value for the length, that is ll. And we do tr dot set what? Width to pass on ww, which is the input for the width. Okay, so now we can clear off that side. So now what we actually intend to do is to calculate for what? The area. So we say integer area, create a variable to store the area, integer area. The area is given as what? The length times the width, isn't it? Right, that is correct. So how do we get the length? How do we get the width? Okay, so now what we're going to do is that to be able to get those values that are now assigned to the length and the width. Okay, so quickly let me do this. And when we call, like we have on line number 13, let me quickly explain that. On line number 13, what this will do is it will call the set length method and then to pass on LL. Okay, so where is the set method? Set length. So LL will pass on its value content into the variable L, and then L will pass on its content to the private variable width. Likewise, on line number 14, WW as an argument, when the set width is called, it will pass on its content to W, and this is W, so W will pass on the content to what? Width. So the private variables are now assigned values. What have we done? We assign values to them, not directly, but through what? The public methods. Okay. All right. So now, if you want to get those values that are assigned to the private variables, we have to go to the public methods that will help us to have access to them. Okay. So what we'll do is use the object tr to have access to the public methods that can help us to access the content of the private variables. Okay. So these are the get methods. So we do tr.get what? Get length. If you are doing the right thing, immediately you press on the dot operator, the name of the method should show. If it doesn't show, means that there is an error. Okay, so it is the length times what? Times the width. So it gets width. Oops. Dot get width. Okay, so we can't call the variables directly. So to call the variables, we have to use what? Their public methods. Okay, and then why are we using tr? We're using tr as the object because the method get length and then get width, they both belong to the class what? Tr. So we have created the object tr to help us have access to these private variables and then the public methods. Okay, so the object is to help us have access to the fields and then the methods. Okay, I repeat myself. The object for the class triangle is to help us have access to the fields, which are the variables, and then the methods, that they are assessors or the mutators. That is primarily what the object is supposed to do. Okay, so the object is not what help us to have access to the private variables, but the object help us to have access to the members of what? Of the class. The members of the class are seen as the fields or variables and then the methods. Okay, I hope that is clear. If it is not much clear with you, you can submit your question at the comment panel. I'll quickly make time to come back and then answer them or throw more light on it. All right, so now we have calculated the area, so we can go ahead and then print out the area. We're going to use the J option pane. So show message dialog. Let's terminate this. So we should have the null operator here. Right area as, let me put the plus symbol here, stored in as area. Okay, so on this line we are going to print this on the Gaussian pane panel. All right, so let's save this and then let's get back to the terminal and then run the code. Okay, so that is to compile and then just run it. Java base. We are waiting for the Gaussian panel. All right, so the length is 10. And the width is, let's say, 12. The area is 0. Is that correct? That is wrong, because it's supposed to multiply. Exactly where this error is coming from. So then we quickly take it out, because multiplying 10 by 12, we should not have the output to be 0. Possibly we are multiplying a string by a numerical value, or we have made an error somewhere. Okay, so we call this input here. Okay, so let's check on this. This is length, this is width, this is length, this is width. Oops, so we got it. You can see over here width and then width. So there is an overriding in the set values. Okay, so this is supposed to be length instead of width. The copy and paste, if you do copy and paste and you don't modify it or you don't fully pay attention to get it well done, then that is what happens. All right, so now quickly let's get back to this side. Let's run the code again. Supposed to be Java. Okay, so we enter same values 10 and then with is 12. All right, so great. Now we have the right output as it is. Okay, so let's look into the code. So what we have done is to practice encapsulation. We created the class base, We created a public method, and then on line number 7, we created the object for the class, and on line number 8 to 12, we are receiving the input and then converting them into the appropriate integer types, and on line number 14, we are passing the values to their respective set methods. Okay, so the input from the user, which is captured as LL and then WW, which actually represents the length and then the width, we'll call this public set method and then to pass on the value, and then this will also this public set width method pass on the values. Okay, so these ones are defined in the class triangle. All right, now coming back to this side, we want to do the calculation on the area. All right, so from this side on line number 14, let me help you to quickly grasp the concept very well. So on line number 14, it calls the method set length. Where is set length? Set length is here. This is the method set length. So LL from here, LL will pass on its content, the value that is stored, it pass on that to L, and then L will pass on the value to the variable length. Don't forget, length has its data type, each access modifier to be private. So if you want to assign a value to it, it should still be possible, but it is just to help us to assign the value not directly to length, but through what? Its public method. Okay, that is why we can only do that assignment by calling the set method. We can't assign the value straight away. Okay, so this is typically how the code is going to work. On line number 15, it's also called the set width. The set width method is almost the same as the set length. So WW passes on the content to W, and then W releases its content to width, and we're able to assign a value to the private variable that has been created earlier on. Okay, by creating these assessors and mutators, making the variables private, that is typically what we call encapsulation. So these are the fields and these are the methods defining the behavior of the class what? Triangle. Okay. We would also in this particular episode want to introduce you to concept on constructors. Constructors are for initialization. Okay, so we take for example the private int length and then private int width. They are all variables that have been created. Their initial values need to be assigned them. Now what we're saying is the constructor will help us do these initializations. Okay, so we're talking of constructors now. Constructors are special methods. Now these special methods, they have the same name as the class. Okay, so in our case, what is the name of our class? The name of our class is called what? Triangle. Okay, the name of our class is triangle, and so it means that we're going to create a method that has the same name as the class. What? Triangle. What is the purpose? Initialization. So to give first values to the variables, we put them in the constructor. I am putting this at the very low level for anyone to be able to relate, so I'm not making the explanation so technical. You should have an access modifier to be public. All the constructors are to be public. Okay, so public triangle all right. Also, do not forget that constructors are not called. They are called automatically when an object is created for the class. Okay, so look at the side. In the main method on line number 7, we have created an object for the class what? Triangle. Now look at this side. In the equation, it looks like a method call, right? This side looks like a method call. So do not forget, constructors are not called. They are called automatically when an object is created for that particular class. So here we have created the object tr. It doesn't mean you're going to do tr dot triangle and then we call the constructor. No, it doesn't need the object. On this line number 7, whilst we did that, we had already invoked the default constructor. By writing this, we are overriding the default constructor. Okay, so now what we are saying is length should be given its initial value, first value. So we will put it at 0. We do same for we have given them their initial values. Okay, I will make time in another video episode and then explain very well what constructors are, and then to also explain to you constructor overloading. Okay, that will be constructors that do have the same name but different parameter list. It is very important that you understand those concepts also. There are some instances where the values we pass on to some methods and some aspects of the code blocks, they have different data types to be able to appropriately capture these ones very well and perform specific calculations on them. Based on their data types, it becomes relevant that you have either constructor overloading or method overloading. But for the purpose of this, I would just mention that constructors do have the same names as the name of the class, and to the understanding of a layperson, the constructor is for initialization. So we have given the length and then the width their initial values. Let's save and then compile this and then see what we would what will happen to our code. Will it work differently? We don't expect it to work differently. What we did was just for initialization. Okay, so let's say this is 12 and then 13. Bam, so it gives us the right output. So it was just for initialization. All right, so if you have any questions on this video, leave the questions in the comment panel and quickly I'll come back to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. If you are new to this channel and you love the presentation, hit on the subscribe button and then click on the bell to get notified anytime new videos are uploaded.